Welcome back to Morning at NTV. Many thanks for still staying with us. We are heavy on #morning at NTV, and particularly for this conversation, we are seeking your views across all the social media platforms. So let's get straight into it, and of course we'll sample some of your views as we continue with this conversation. So the conversation on Take Note this morning is on inclusive education. Now, inclusive education has become a dominant policy, trend and practice in many countries. Globally, it is premised on the theory that advances the human perspective as the sole drive for the provisions of inclusive education and the EFA goals. Now, globally, inclusive education approach has been approved to be the best education system that is responsive to the learner diversity. It must ensure all learners have the best possible opportunities to learn. Now, there is now a dire need to inform the public about the ongoing process of the policy and explain the journey thus far and that ahead in regards to having the NIE policy agreed. Now, because of that particular background, the Uganda Society for Disabled Children and Open Society in East Africa is pushing a discussion on this inclusion. Now, joining us this morning in studios to have that conversation, I'm being joined by Mr. Brighton Barugahare. He is the Assistant Commissioner and Policy Analysis from the Ministry of Education and Sports. Many thanks for joining us, sir. Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you and good morning, viewers.
Good morning. Next to him, I do have Mrs. Ayasiga Sarah. She is the Acting Assistant Commissioner, Inclusive Education and Non-Formal Education as well. Many thanks and welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you and good morning, viewers.
Good morning. All right, so our mandate this morning is to break down this draft, this document. And I think I'll start, ladies first. I'll start with you. We do know that we have quite a number of provisions in the Constitution of Uganda, of course, from persons living with disabilities, and all these other facets have been pretty much allocated in the Constitution. But practically on ground, things are different, and that's why we have this. Just give us a background into the real need that is on the ground with regards to inclusive education for all. You know, the notion has always been for the people who have special needs, but now we're saying for all. Give us a background.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you everybody who is there viewing us. I want to start on the note that education is a right for everyone, and Uganda as a country believes and honors that right, that everyone should get a right. And the country has gone ahead actually to put strategies in place to ensure that all learners get education. But along the way, practically on the ground, you will find that there are very many of those learners who are not accessing education. And the evidence is there. Maybe sooner or later we shall be even flagging that evidence.
Right.
But everywhere you will find that there are very many learners who are not accessing education. You'll find that even when you look at our, people look at the national assessments, because that's what brings out clear, because there is always publicity about it.
Right.
Learners like now, they have just finished their PLOE, and the others have also finished their UCE, Uganda Certificate of Education exams. You'll find that at the end of the cycle, at the end, come February, you will find that so many of those are not going to translate. We sit and say, you are eligible, you are eligible, you are not eligible, therefore you cannot penetrate. That's why you'll find that. And among them, you'll find that, like, there are very many vulnerable learners who are not going, and we keep quiet.
So are you saying that it's not just about people living with special needs, it's also about them that take time to grasp some of these aspects in school?
Yeah, they are. So, globally, and even here is Uganda internationally, when we talk about including learners, inclusion of learners, many people put it to mean that we are talking about learners who have disabilities only.
Right.
But this is wider. This is because the scope is wider. It's not only learners with disabilities who fail to access, but even other, those who are slow, those who have other live under difficult circumstances. those ones who are on the street. We have learners who are poor, poverty-stricken homes, who sometimes they come to school, they are chased away, and eventually they cannot cope with the others. So all those and so many others who are not even understood rightly, right? For you see the learner, you see the learner can see, can hear very well, but he has a disability that is invisible, like dyslexic learner. All those are learners we are talking about. Practically, there are many of those. You will find that when we come to, I told you, I will come to February when results come out. You'll look, when you look at the average that we believe that these are the ones that have performed, those ones who remain under are the majority.
Right, and they don't progress to the next level. All right.
They filter on the streets.
Okay.
They are there helpless, and so many challenges are.
All right, and we'll be getting into the solutions of that and what the policy does recommend in terms of assimilation of such into vocational training and all these other spaces. Mr. Brighton, let me bring you in on this one. We know that in 1997, the government did roll out the UPE. 2007, we did have the universal secondary education. Now, my question to you would be, and of course, still pointing out to the background of this particular push and pull for this particular policy, wasn't this policy, these two policies, weren't they enough to cater for that inclusive push for government?
Thank you very much, moderator. The right to education is for all Ugandans. And that right to education moves across all the levels. Our education system has 4 levels. It starts with pre-primary, which is from 3 to 5. Then it goes to primary, which is 7 to 12 in terms of age appropriate. And it moves to secondary, which is 13 and above. And then after secondary, we go to tertiary, which includes all these other institutions. So you will discover that in our Education Act, Education for Primary, Primary and Post-Primary Act, the role of providing pre-primary education has been restricted to the private sector, civil society, or individuals. And currently, those are not beneficiaries of UPE. But they are also Ugandans, therefore who are entitled to right to education. Therefore, we have low access levels of that category. Out of 3.6 million who are eligible in that category, only 600,000 are accessing. So we have 3 million children between 3 to 5 who are in our homes, who are there, and therefore they are excluded. This policy is trying to address the idea that education is good for everybody. And therefore we cannot have practices, systems, structures, interventions that work for some and not for all.
Correct.
And when you look at secondary, primary, we have the biggest enrollment, but the challenge is that they are not transitioning. And I have also seen some media observations and comments on where are these learners. You enroll 1.8 million children in P1, at P7 they are 600. And clearly 1.2 million are not explained, which means the system has in one way or the other excluded them. And the secondary, the transition is lowest. And when you go to university, our enrollment is much below the sub-Saharan average. And for the country to develop and achieve this middle income status, we need to be having an enrollment of at least 40% consistently in the higher education or tertiary education for us to transit.
So can you point out some of these challenges with regards to why we're seeing that low transition number? And I'll start with you, Ms. Sarah, because we know that one of the critical issues, especially pointing out to the girl child, is early marriage, pregnancy, and all these other issues to do with sexual and reproductive health. How will this policy cater to that function that we critically know is, contributing to the low transition levels of the girl child from, of course, primary level to secondary level? Let's not even mention to tertiary level.
As Brighton has mentioned it, this policy is geared to really making sure that all learners are accessing, are retaining, are going to be retained, and they are engaged, and eventually they are achieving. So we are looking at designing a system that is going to ensure that all these learners under all those categories, under all those circumstances, have been brought on board. Looking at the systems, there are very many systems that we are talking about, and we are looking at how they are really excluding. Look at assessment, look at our structural designs, look at our methodology, pedagogy in classrooms. We want to look at even the infrastructure and all those issues. So the policy is really geared into how do we design, how do we transform the systems to ensure that they address the diversities that we have.
So what you're saying is that thanks to this policy, if it's taken up, we'll see girls who are mothers go back to school.
That's what I was coming to. Because previously, we have been looking at this girl who has been pregnated as a failure. We condemn her, not really looking deeper, taking a deep dive into what could have happened to this girl. They are raped. Some of them are given away by their parents when actually they are not ready for that marriage, and you find that they are in a dilemma. So we are looking at how do we address, because these are all learners who have special needs, you would say.
Right.
They have those needs which we must see. How do we address, and even ministry has already started looking into that. Girls who are pregnated, girls who are being diverted from education to go in for early marriage or whatever, how do we save them? So we are already creating systems. How do we save them? We have the gender unit in our department, in our ministry, that is really making sure that how do we make sure that these girls go back to school and eventually also are able to build their bricks and
right.
Yeah.
Right. You know, sir, if I look, when I'm looking through this particular breakdown of the process of this draft and where we are at now, of course, we're waiting for it to take course in terms of approval by government. One of it that is critical right here is the involvement by the public. And that's why we are here today. So in terms of public participation in developing this, where can we chip in?
Thank you very much. This process has been on, I think, for the last 2 years. But before that, there had been an effort to come up with a national special needs policy only targeting learners with, I think, special needs, which in that perspective had only focused on disabilities. And then there was also another attempt to come up with a policy which was only focusing on non-formal education. These people have dropped out. How can you help them acquire some basic education that can enable them to prosper and also integrate as citizens? But when we looked at the Sustainable Development Goal 4, we discovered that it is addressing that by trying to promote inclusive education and equitable, which is for all. So we decided to merge those two undertakings into one and start all over the whole process of analyzing. And after that, we have done consultations in the whole country. Of course, it is very difficult to consult everybody, but we have been doing stakeholder mapping. We have moved in eastern Uganda, we have moved to northern Uganda, we have moved to western Uganda, we have moved to southwestern Uganda, we have moved to central Uganda. We have also involved students who really face some of these disabilities challenges of exclusion. We have consulted them. We have also consulted Makerere University. They have organized, I think, 2 conferences involving different multiple stakeholders. We have, and we are still open, we have consulted all the civil society organizations that work on behalf or in the interest of the people living with disabilities, and we are still open. So all the feedback we have got is that this policy is long overdue. And to add on what Sarah is saying, you were asking why. There are systems also from our side which have been promoting exclusion.
Right.
I think the underlying factor to understand is there exclusion in our education system? Our conviction and our evidence is that the answer is yes. If you take, for example, every time now that it is 3rd term, there are many schools that are preparing to chase students, not because they are not in school, not because they are married, and they wanted, of course, to beg to defer from the idea of these early marriages and those other things. I know they are there, but the biggest people are eliminated from education by the systems. A school will come and say, if you don't get 65,
You're out.
you are out. And they don't tell you where you go. And these are people who have been paid. These are people who are professional teachers, but they have started eliminating people, and the parents are willing to send children to school. They have paid the money, but the system, they say, you have not meet our standards. Now, there are 4 reasons why we go to school, or why the purpose of education, according to UNESCO. 1 is to acquire knowledge, which is therefore to develop the cognitive abilities. But 2 is to acquire skills and competencies.
Right.
And 3 is to acquire the values, to know who you are and how do you understand and appreciate yourself. But finally, how do you live together? Now, our system is only focusing on academic success. You score AAA, everybody claps and celebrate.
But who do we blame? Because we always know that after examinations, there's that, you know, pretty much rationing of these particular schools. We always have in the newspapers, school number 1, school number 2. And of course, it happens also in, you know, with regards to the performance of the students. And we know that students that don't perform well never have a chance at
and
it.
that is
so
why
what do we do?
What we are going to do is that we are going to insist that education is not about academic success.
So do we not grade examinations? Are we
We
saying
will
that?
grade because there are different reasons for grading, but the grading cannot have the purpose of eliminating runners from school. We are saying, even when my daughter or my son is in a school and is not an academic giant, he's learning to live with peers. He's acquiring the value system of how do you conduct yourself, who do you want to become. So he cannot acquire that by simply being eliminated from school. And the schools now must know that once this policy is passed, they will be accountable. And already we have already put provisions of accountability in the national teacher policy. That once you have given you a student, you will have to account for that student. You not only account for the getting the A's and what. If these students are not in school, the school must account and the teachers must know, because these children are known. They come, register details of their parents, you know where they live. So it cannot be true that we don't know where these children are.
Ms. Sarah, you know, grading has always been an issue, and you know that in some schools actually across the world, they don't do grading anymore. It's always about just measuring how you are, your skills, you know, what it is that you can do practically. Even in some kindergarten levels, there's no grading.
Yeah.
So
It's all about someone accounting for the time they have been wherever they are.
right. Do you think the Ministry of Education can accept to that? And if anything is to change about the grading, what ought to change?
I think, let me chip in.
Okay.
I work for Ministry of Education and
Yes.
Sports. And I think Sarah is in the Ministry of Education and Sports. So
Correct.
the question of can the Ministry of Education accept, we are trying to reflect, you know, policies are not made out of the blue. They are made for a purpose. We have done an evaluation and come to the conclusion that we need to make some reforms. Those reforms means that we acknowledge limitations within our system moving forward. So the idea of accepting is out of question. But the issue of how, we are even trying to establish, can we identify the needs of every learner as they join the school? And therefore we have developed a tool, a comprehensive tool. There are many learners who don't know that they have sight issues. There are many learners who are geniuses and we don't know. So every time they are in school, they get bored, because a genius does not need a lesson of 40 minutes to understand. They actually will understand in 10 or less minutes.
Right.
And for most of the time, they will be either playing or asking questions, and they will be punished for being naughty. They will want to go out, and teachers will not allow. But it is also not true that a slow learner, who is also a learner, by the way, requires 45 minutes. That time is too short.
Right.
Therefore, they need more time, they need remedios, they need to be helped. Now, our teachers have to be prepared in a manner that they are helping all the learners. They are not helping some of the learners. The first learners, and then others are left aside. So we are saying teachers will have to account for all the learners, and they will have to be prepared on how do you help all these learners to make sure that they acquire the competence that are required out of them for that level.
You know, you actually mentioned the pre-assessment
Yes.
of every child
At entry.
at entry level. It is an ideal situation. It is an ideal dream. But in terms of the implementation framework, what are we looking at? Because, you know, we can have it perfectly on paper, but totally differently on the ground. We know there are even other policies that are being, pretty much catered for in the documentation processes with regards to how a teacher should teach and stuff like that. But when you go on the ground, this is not adhered to. So with regards to this draft and the implementation framework to ensure that all these ideals are actually executed, what is the plan?
We have come up with a roadmap, which we actually pray that as education planners and implementers have to follow to ensure that we do really cater for all this. And that's why we are even here, because these are the ideal situations that we want to create. We are looking at leaving no child behind. We have come up with the strategies and even coming up with that tool, the learning needs identification tool, where we are saying at entry level, each learner should be screened to find out how much can this learner grasp, and how is this learner going to be helped to grasp whatever he can grasp. We are looking at having capacity developed for the teachers to ensure that they are able to identify. That is the beginning of it all. So long as we actually make sure we have captured the teacher, we have made sure we have developed his capacity to ensure that when all these learners come, he's able to identify, he's able to screen, and if there is any need for referral to other levels, he can refer, so that that child from the start he gets interventions that can help him or her transit.
All right.
Other than keep on pumping a child, when actually, there are learners who have come, and right from day one, a teacher starts this is A, this is B, this is what. Some of them cannot even hear it. Some of them cannot even see it. Some of them even cannot even interpret it. The brain cannot interpret that A to make it look like it. And then sometimes they are beaten for crimes that they have not committed. So we are looking at making sure we design those systems that are going to ensure that everybody has been put into it, including the parents, including other community members, and even people who are on the road. We know, how are you going to help this child if a child has a wheelchair and is going to go to the next neighboring school? As LOCs, people who are in the community, how do you ensure that that child who is going to go through that road, that path to the so we know sometimes it may, we have the framework.
Right.
The challenge is, how are we going to ensure that everyone comes to agree with us and to make sure that they do their role, to make sure that every child is helped and every child is able to account for the time, and even committing a teacher to account for the child, for every child that you have had. Other countries ahead of us, because they make sure they account for every child who has come. They will trace this Sarah, trace this Brighton, and see where do they end.
Right. So accountability on the student journey from A to Z. Now, let's flip over. Let's assume that this is taken up. Let's assume that that pre-assessment of every child is taken up and is done perfectly well. And every teacher does understand, well, I have 16 students in my class. Maybe half of that are well gifted in terms of grasping everything perfectly well. Now, half of that have different challenges. Now, my question to you is, how sustainable will that ideal be? Knowing the challenges that we have in the education sector right here in the country, the student to teacher ratio still wanting, all these other factors with regards to equipping the schools with the necessary resources to get to that ideal, still a challenge. How are we planning on bridging that gap? Because they can do it well in terms of the assessment, but continuously sustaining that standard could be a challenge.
Thank you very much. This policy is not only focusing on one intervention of identifying. I think identifying is the starting point to intervening. But there are many proposals we are putting across in this policy. The other proposal is, how can we restructure? Like, for example, you will discover there are many students since we adopted the compulsory sciences in 2007, sciences are like 5 subjects out of the 7 or 8 compulsory subjects. And in some schools, there are no laboratories, there are no science teachers, and it is a mess.
Right.
Now, we are saying, why should you say everybody must do sciences? Because I think that was not the idea of the people who wanted to promote science. The idea was, how can we create incentives and systems for those who are talented to excel, and then to help those who are interested to join. But this idea of one size fits it all now clearly cannot work. And the evidence is that the biggest numbers of people we're having who are dropping out of school is because they fail sciences.
Right.
And sciences are not well taught, there are no laboratories, there are no science teachers. So we are going to say that. There is another limitation where we are saying every runner after PLE who scores aggregate 28 and above is not eligible for USE. But USE is the cheapest available option for those people who may not have resources. So once you put there 28, supposing I got 28 or 29 and I don't have money, I want to study, and actually my purpose is not to be an academician. My purpose is first of all to acquire some competencies, grow with my other peers, I'm able to learn the value system. So all those things we are saying, we are going to remove them. And therefore, when you identify the needs of the runner, you're able to help. Now, the teacher-pupil ratio, the reason you assess the needs of the runners is to help to categorize them, so that you don't get fast runners or geniuses to study with slow runners, because that's a distortion. So when the teacher gets to know that there are 10 children who are gifted,
Right.
even when they say they are ahead, you give them additional assignment as you work with these ones. So the issue of the ratios is a resource constraint which we are trying to work on. We must work within our resource.
So we can work around it
Yes.
somewhat.
And it is working
Because,
in some schools.
A majority of teachers, as we, of course, you're going to be linking directly to social media because we have quite a bit of feedback and questions for you. Always the lingo that comes through from the teachers is that, number one, we are stressed, we are ill-equipped, we're not enough. And also the other issue is we are also given too much pressure to cover the syllabus before the examination period. But let's switch over to Romeo Busiku. He does have what you have to say with regards to this particular conversation. Over to you, Romeo.
Well, thank you, Mala. The conversation right there, the technical conversation, is inclusive education, and it's against that background that we've derived our poll question, and we're asking what can be done to ensure that people with disabilities and special needs can access the same quality of education as their able-bodied counterparts. 3 key words: people with disabilities, equitable access to quality education, and number 3, able-bodied counterparts. Well, you've been swift to give us your responses, and I'll sample some of those right here on Facebook. Mam Nasa Sophia, you're saying all schools should be inclusive to help fight discrimination. This should start with government schools. Unfortunately, these have been neglected. You make them inclusive by empowering the teachers through capacity building to handle these children, creating awareness among the children on issues of disability, and most importantly, availing the necessary infrastructure or facilities in those schools to make movement and learning super convenient. This will make the school environment friendly, conducive, and our children will be better positioned. Thank you very much, Mama Nasa Sophia. You couldn't have been more right on that. George Mulinzi, you're saying this needs a special budget in terms of having good facilities that favor good learning. Parliament should enact a law. Thank you, George. Fiona C. Sozi, assistive technologies are readily available. Ministry of Education needs to drive the initiatives and support schools that take care of such learners. Mala, I'm really liking the responses right here on social media. Kalibala George Wilson, you're saying just empower Butcherman Sipapa and Pastor Iga. Kalibala must have lost the plot. Itama Frank, you're saying government should put more effort and put some schools for disabled from local to central level. Rashima Julius is saying reducing on the budget of presidential tours and provide the necessities to people with disabilities. I couldn't agree more. Noble Israel, you're saying empowerment from the government and funding will help to to empower these students? Agarem Babazi Peterson, you're saying each region should have at least 2 specific schools for them, and the government should provide to them with 100% of all their needs. Sental Tom, you're saying giving them 85% scholarships to motivate them into the system. Thank you very much. SV Johnsoft, you're saying giving them much attention as in all what they ask for or what they need. SV is actually saying in their entirety whatever they need should be given to them without any more questions. Inclusive education. What can be done to ensure that people living with disabilities and special needs can access the same level of quality education as their able-bodied counterparts? That's the conversation we're having on TechNot today. Back to you, Mala.
Many thanks, Romeo Busiku, for that, and many thanks to you who's watching us for your views. Keep those conversations going, of course, on #morning at NTV across all the social media platforms. Back to my panel. All right, so it's clear that there's dire need for creating awareness, for sensitization and empowerment. Empowerment of not just those people who directly interact with the students, but the community at large. Your take, madam?
Yeah. That's why we're here, and that's why we are saying that we should have a policy that is going to address the diversity of all these categories that we are talking about. And somebody was talking about how are we going to ensure that children with disabilities, or maybe even other special needs, how are they going to learn with the others who are able-bodied?
Right.
How are they going to move together? That's why we are saying we have already started on the strategies. We are looking at having a tool to assess them. As Brighton stated it very clearly, once you assess and you get to know that these are learners who are gifted, then it will be a service if you try, you give them the same content.
But let me ask you, Ms. Sarah, how do we break that, how will I put it, cultural barriers, perceptions that we have as individuals? You know, I read somewhere where it was saying inclusion is not a set of strategies or placement issue. Inclusion is about belonging to a community, a group of friends, and being wanted as well.
Yes.
You know, we can push for all these things, but there's that discrimination. We also have that, you know, that culture mindset whereby when someone, for example, with disability walks in, we start to look at them at a different light, in a different light. So how do we break those barriers in our heads? Where do we begin?
The barriers are always there, have been there, and are still there. You know, attitude is a very big monster that actually impacts very much on very many changes that come on board. And when we talk about people with disabilities or even other learners who have other special needs, when they come in, people tend to think that they cannot perform. That's why we are saying once we start addressing these systems, we give opportunity to each of these learners to really use what they have to express, to make a living, to participate, to get them engaged. What has been happening that we have been trying to say no, even without engaging them to see how much can they do.
Yeah.
We say, oh, he's disabled. No, he cannot fit. But once we open up, that's why we are trying, we want to really make sure we sensitize, we tell people that there is still potential in this child.
All right.
Let's just give her the opportunity to do what they can. By the way, even among those who are able-bodied, we cannot perform at the same. I've been going to schools and I tell, you know, teachers, cane children who have performed very low, and they go with those ones because they have got the desired marks that they want. I tell the teachers, even if I took you to playground, lined up you and told you to run up to the other rope where it is, no, you will not arrive at the same time.
Correct.
Meaning here that you have different abilities.
All right. So we need to start accepting each other with our weaknesses.
Appreciate what one can do. And once you open up, that's when people will start understanding.
Okay, all right. Mr. Brighton, we always know human nature. And with human nature, well, we can have a set of rules. But if we don't know that there's also a set of consequences once you breach or once you don't comply, then you're forced to comply. So I looked at this particular draft policy and that factor is missing. Are we saying that we're letting people to take it in, and once it's approved, maybe what's the plan in terms of making sure that everyone complies to this?
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about some of the views that are coming, arguing that we need to have more schools for the disabled. Our view is that that is also exclusion. A kid or a child is born in a family and a community, and they are supposed to live in that community inherently. If they choose to live. Now, when we were doing these consultations, we noted we were in Mbale, and the people who manage the Mbale school for the deaf, they were telling us parents come and throw children. They don't even deliver them. They put them on a border. They don't even pay the border. The guy comes at the school and dumps a child there and starts asking people, give me my money. Now, you realize that this is now is not a stranger. These are their parents or relatives. So we are saying, and the kid goes there, they never pick them for holiday. They never interact with them. So we are saying, those who are promoting schools for the persons with disabilities are also promoting exclusion. That's not the community. That's not a natural community.
So they ought to be assimilated in the normal structure.
And this policy is about how can we support these people to live as naturally as any other citizen.
Okay.
So I wanted to correct that. These schools which are there, we are not going to close them for now, because there are people who have multiple impairments and we don't have the capacity of sustaining them in the communities. We will keep them and develop them into resource centers where people can learn and acquire those competencies, but those who are integratable, they must go back to society.
All right.
Now, you are saying, will it be a question of goodwill? No.
Yes.
For now, the policy is focusing on incentives for people to understand the problem and work into implementing it. But this policy, once it is approved, it will trigger a number of reforms in our legal regime.
Okay.
Therefore, we will create sanctions. And we are already, for example, creating sanctions under the teacher policy. We are saying a teacher is accountable, and accountability is not accountability for money. You are accountable for the runners and the running outcomes.
Right.
Therefore, if you have 50 runners, and at the end of the term you say you have 30, you must first explain where are the 20. It's not about the grade, it's about the numbers.
So whenever we have dropouts, a teacher should
first of all,
count for that.
Yes, and the head teacher and the parents.
Correct.
So we are targeting everybody, because when a teacher gives us to know that these children are not in school, we will find out, are they in another school? Because being not in this school does not mean that they're not in the school. Parents could have relocated. So we'll find out, these people, I tried to ask, because even if you live in the village, somebody will know you have moved from Kasese to Kampala. Therefore, your child is in school. Now, once we establish that, we will verify. And it is very easy to verify, because now we'll have a central register for all the teachers in the whole country.
All right.
So that we're able to trace these children.
Okay.
And once we discover they're out of school, it is going even to be an offense for you people who employ these children of school-going age as maids, as shamba boys.
Right.
It is going to be very risky. That once we discover a child and they are not of age, because we now have a record, we will go for you.
We'll be able to track it.
Track them, and it will be an offense.
All right. Okay, Miss Sarah, as we wrap this up, there's a viewer who's commented on priorities in terms of funding the ministry and its operations, from the teachers to everything. And before we came into this particular segment, we were having a conversation with regards to the examinations that are underway. Children who are barred from sitting the examinations because they couldn't pay. We're talking of 50,000 or less. And so that's also another form of discrimination on grounds of pay. What are you looking at in terms of tangible and solid solutions moving forward, whereby we don't have discrimination on grounds of financial capacity and strength?
What we are looking at is to, as Breton says, creation of sanctions. If it has been said that once, I can use the example that somebody, or what you have given, that you have been talking about, those who are missing exams, and once it has been passed that if a learner, and it has passed actually, a learner has registered, then there is no legal right to stop him or her from writing his exams.
Okay.
You would rather have not, or maybe stopped him, you would have got that money that he paid for registration, and then you've turned it to be your school, your fees, other than stop him.
Are we also saying that you're going to also stop the barriers whereby a child who doesn't have a certain grade, a child who has special needs, is actually not even allowed in the first place to join certain schools? Are we saying that is going to be broken as well?
No.
Okay.
No, we can't do that. What we are looking at, in this policy, there is also a part where we are talking about resource mobilization. Because knowing very well that a learner who is vulnerable, and especially this learner who is disabled, who may need a wheelchair. Let me take, for example, a learner who is blind. A learner who is blind actually takes triple, needs like a triple fund, more than even triple than the other one who is not blind, because he will need a braille machine, which goes not less than 3 million shillings. That is his book, and he must have that book because he's not going to have this paper. He will have braille paper, which is also very expensive when compared to this ordinary paper. He will have the styluses, he will have the other writing frames.
So their needs are
white
higher.
pen, and their needs are higher. So that's why this policy is coming in force to really open up the eyes of government, the eyes of even international, that this learner needs the unit cost of really looking after or educating this child who is blind or who is physical or multiply disabled is higher than. Therefore, when we are allocating resources, can we look at really getting rational, we call it rationalizing it, making sure that for this, you cannot give the same amount of money for this learner and the other one who is going to buy a book at 1,000 shillings, and for him he is at 3 million.
All right. So, Mr. Brighton, what happens to schools whereby they don't admit children who don't meet the admission fee levels? What happens to such schools? Because that is also grounds of discrimination. And some of the cases that we've received is that a child who's well performed but is not allowed, is not admitted into school X just because they were not able to meet the cost of admission. So are we looking at that as well?
I think every barrier that disadvantages a child from accessing education is being targeted by this policy. The other issue we have to consider is to strike a right balance between what we are proposing and what is practical. And usually hiding in money is not a criteria for being admitted. If I have merited, I have given you a choice, I've been admitted, money is a secondary factor. First admit me, then ask me for the money. But we have noted also some practices where schools, they admit people, you see your name on the list, then they say, go and pay money in the bank, come and pick admission.
Correct.
That means you have not admitted me. And those are some of the barriers which over time have eliminated many people, and we are saying they are all going to be put to stop with this policy. The other appeal I am making is for you, the media. You really have to support us. You have a platform which we don't have, and you reach a wider audience. So really, your support into some of these policies, and you have been really promoting the idea that many good policies which don't work. We want you to also start having faith that for once there are things that are going to work, and once people start to know that these things are coming also from the media, they will change perception. Because parents who hear things don't work, even when you tell them this thing is well considered and will work, they already start developing. We know Uganda things don't work. Policies are developed here, they don't work.
But at least as NTV, we've made the first step towards supporting
and we appreciate that. And that partnership should continue. But finally, parents must know that children have a right to education, and their work is to support them. So we know that most of the exclusion is influenced by parents who say, for you are weak, you cannot understand, for you get married, what is studying to be. So we are saying parents, first and foremost, they must know that when you have produced a child, it is no longer your responsibility to make decisions, especially bad decisions, which for the child.
All right, thank you so much. Ms. Sarah, your last remarks.
Yeah, my remark is all about appeal to everyone to ensure that we support this policy, because this policy cannot stand alone, or maybe only Minister of Education, maybe and media alone, but is actually it brings on board every stakeholder, because every stakeholder has a part to play, has a role to play, and once we play our roles appropriately, we are going to make sure that all the learners, and what the public should know, that once we don't play our roles, we are all going to suffer. We have seen all these atrocities happening on the roads in our villages. It is because this learner, this person, at one time, he was excluded from education, from getting the values that he. So we all matter into this policy.
All right. Many thanks, Ms. Sarah Ayesiga, of course, for coming through. Now you know, and also she is, just for you to know, the Acting Assistant Commissioner, Inclusive Education and Non-Formal Education as well. She was also joined by Mr. Brighton Barugahare. He is the Assistant Commissioner, Policy Analysis from the Ministry of Education and Sports. Zero discrimination for all. Education is for each and every child, regardless of their special needs. That's the conversation. Of course, we'll be hosting them next week on Thursday to just continue breaking down that conversation and identify the missing links and how to bridge that. All right? So that's it for this particular conversation. I'd like to link to Romeo Busiku. He does have birthday wishes for you. Romeo.